Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final session of our Learning from Leaders for this academic year. And what is best to conclude our sessions to welcome somebody that's passionate about sustainability and somebody that is a champion in sustainability and a champion in sports. We have the CEO of Formula E, Jeff Dodds. And to welcome him, we have, as always, Peter Vanham, our host from Learning from Leaders. And I will hand on the floor to you, Peter. Have a great session, everybody.
Thank you. And thank you indeed for that wonderful introduction. I'm super excited to be speaking again with Jeff Dodds. Jeff is an amazing person, as you'll hopefully all get to see and hear in the next 60 minutes. He's also, of course, an established business leader, which we want to ask him all about. And I think that many of you will be particularly excited by the business that he leads, which is indeed the Formula E, the electric car racing championship that I assume many of you have followed. Perhaps some of you have been to in person. And so we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about Jeff as a person and as a leader. And some of you will also get to ask some questions to Jeff. So very exciting. Jeff, welcome so much to Learning from Leaders. We always start with the rather simple question, but often a revealing question, which is the following: where are you joining us from? And of course, how are you doing?
Now, first of all, I'm hoping I'm off mute.
Yes, you are.
Perfect. There we go. So technology at its finest. So I've just returned from Monaco. We had a doubleheader race weekend in Monaco. So I got back on Monday evening. So I'm now sitting in my office at the top of the tower in Hammersmith in London, looking out over a glorious London afternoon.
Wow, that's amazing. I have to ask you about your background. I see some racing helmets there, and I suppose some bottles of champagne. Are those specifically Formula E racing helmets and bottles, or are those your personal collection?
So I have racing helmets at home that aren't Formula E. These three behind me here are all Formula E helmets. They are, let me check. So you've got one there from our inaugural race in Tokyo, in the central city of Tokyo. You've got Mr. Beast's helmet there from when he raced in our Evo sessions. And you have a generic Formula E helmet there. I previously raced myself, so I have a motor racing license, and I worked in Formula One with Honda many moons ago. So I've raced, if it has an engine, I've raced it, Peter. So I have lots of helmets kicking around.
That's
So the champagne's there. If I have a really difficult day in the office, I normally crack that open.
And not even the regular bottle, but the Magnum one. I like that.
When I have a tough day, it's a really tough day. So a regular bottle's never enough.
That's amazing. So of course we all know Formula E. I think I've definitely watched it. I'm Belgian myself, so we have a former Formula E world champion, I believe, and he's still in the race. And as some people might know it, in fact, from having assisted, because you race mostly in city circuits, some of the largest cities in the world. Could you tell us a little bit in broad strokes, though, for those that may be slightly less familiar, what Formula E is and what makes it so special?
Of course. So the Formula E is 10 years old. So in motorsports terms, it's a real baby. To give you a comparison, Formula One's 75 years old, MotoGP nearly 75 years old. So we're a real baby. Formed 10 years ago, but with three principles in mind, Peter. So the first was create a world-class motorsport that in time can grow in size to compete directly with Formula One, albeit battery electric vehicle only. So no internal combustion engine. So that was kind of pillar one. Pillar two is to accelerate the energy transition. So to give you the numbers, 25% of global energy emissions are created through transport, half of those through road transport, so passenger cars. So Formula E was created to try and accelerate people off of internal combustion engines onto battery electric vehicles. 10 years ago, in that year, there were only 300,000 electric vehicles sold. So back then, that was a pretty big ask. This year, there'll be around 18 million. And probably by 2030, there'll be between 30 and 40 million electric vehicles sold that year. So we've come a long way in 10 years. And the final pillar was to drive a sustainable future. So to put environmental sustainability at the heart of everything we did. So we've been net zero from day zero. So you put those three things together, You got the fastest growing motorsport in the world, up to 400 million fans, cars getting faster and faster, rapidly riding the tailwind of electrification. And at the same time, as we grow, continuing to do that in a net zero way.
I mean, it sounds amazing to me. I'm a big fan of that. As you know, I cover sustainability.
Mm.
One of the things that I always wonder about in this case, and I think that a lot of car manufacturers wonder about, is just how big the overlap is between enthusiasts of racing and the sustainable or the electric part of it. I talked, for example, to Jochen Zeitz, the owner of Harley Davidson.
Yeah.
And he at some point came to the conclusion that the people that are fans of Harley Davidson and its sort of motors that are sort of making a lot of noise were not, in fact, the same people who bought the Livewire motorbikes that are all electric, and so he spun them off. Could you tell us a little bit more about that overlap in your case, especially like who follows Formula E?
Yeah.
Are they mostly attracted by the sustainability part, by the racing part? Tell us a little bit more about them.
Yeah. So look, we think about 40% of our audience also watches other motorsport, and by other motorsport,
It
predominantly.
sounds low. Is that low?
Well, it's low because if you looked at, well, I say it's low, so it's complicated. So it feels low, doesn't it? But if we looked at, do Formula One fans watch IndyCar or NASCAR, the likelihood is probably not, because it's a very different form of motor racing. Does a MotoGP fan watch Formula One? Probably very low. But when you look at Formula One and Formula E, they sound so incredibly similar. You would think there would be a high crossover. It's not that high, about 40%. Our audience, very different to the rest of motorsport. So first of all, we're broadly split 50-50 male, female. Most motorsports, they skew very heavily male. We are much more diverse in our audience base. So a typical motorsport tends to skew quite white, quite male, quite middle class. And roughly half of our audience base is under the age of 40. They also tend to be much more interested in technology, much more interested in innovation, and thankfully for you and I, much more interested in the environment and sustainability. So yeah, I would argue a more digitally native audience.
I mean, how do you explain it? And by the way, I saw some of the students react with thumbs up and hearts, which sort of course, suggests that what you're saying resonates with them, which I suppose is good for them and for you.
Yeah. I always work on the basis, if it's a heart, it relates to what I've said, not the fact that a 50-year-old bald man with a beard is saying things, Peter. So I think a lot of people are just, particularly of this demographic, because I have two younger children as well. They're excited that there are organizations, in spite of what we see politically around the world, that are still very focused on doing the right thing from a societal point of view, and also focused on trying to leave the planet in a better place.
And of course, that is your DNA. Now the other challenge, I think, that a lot of businesses that have been focusing on sustainability beyond perhaps the political part of it, the other challenge that a lot of them have had is to make it work as a business. Tell us a little bit about the business of Formula E. Like, how does it work? How do you make money? What's the business model like?
Yeah, so we're still effectively a startup business. So 10 years is a very short period of time in sports businesses. We are officially the second most successful startup sport this century.
Wow.
After the IPL, the Indian Premier League Cricket League, which of course has 1 billion or so followers out in India who are very excited by it, and it's traveling pretty well. But we would be number two. And the business model kind of works like this. So we have one very large investor, that's Liberty Global. Liberty Media also own Formula One, but Liberty Global own Formula E. So we have one large investor, and we're currently investing to grow. So, and by investing, I mean developing new cars, faster cars, going to new cities, having more interesting media activities. So we're investing to grow. But the way the business model works is the revenue comes from the teams that race in the series, pay to race. When we take our show to various different countries around the world, they often invest in the race to get us to go to their city. And quick fact for you: if we go and race in a city, we normally generate somewhere between 50 and 100 million euros of economic value for the place we race through tourism and media value and all that good stuff. Then we have sponsors. and partners. So for us, ABB, Infosys, Google, Tatangier, all of these big sponsors, global sponsors. And then we also have media deals. Media deals is that with broadcast partners around the world for us to show our product. You may have seen we actually launched on Amazon Prime Video our documentary series last weekend. So that's generally how it works. Sponsors and partners, media partnerships, and the teams pay to race. And there is often some city funding that sits in there as well.
Right. I'll maybe ask a follow-up questions about that, because one of the things that you see also, one of the claims to fame of Formula One nowadays. I spoke to Toto Wolff a few months back, and he was very proud of the fact that which I suppose has been the case for many years and many decades, perhaps in Formula One, that there is some sort of a trickle down effect of the technology that's developed also in Formula One. That basically one of the commercial reasons why a team like Mercedes might decide to participate is that basically the latest technology they develop for Formula One cars might not be profitable in their own right, but they become profitable when they get introduced into mass-produced vehicles, which of course Mercedes has many of. Is that a similar calculation, you think, for the Formula E teams that are basically developing their electric battery and electric cars, Formula E?
Now, Peter, look, we're amongst friends, aren't we? Right. So I can talk candidly. So obviously I love Toto, but let's be clear, right? The internal combustion engine was created in 1860, and the first version of it seen really in the transport car was in 1885. So the Benz engine in 1885. So it's 140 years old. Let's be clear, they're not developing very much on that engine that is new to cars. Okay, so that's been iterated to within an inch of its life. And then they're putting that car in a wind tunnel, and they're spending tens to hundreds of millions of dollars trying to eke out the tiniest margins of efficiency. That's not that interesting for a road car. So I'm sure Toto could give you examples. I'd love
He's
to
a
hear
very
them.
likable guy.
I love it. Yeah,
if he wants to be, I suppose.
But I'm sure he can give you specific examples. Whereas the battery electric vehicle, the motor and battery that sits within that, which are the two primary components, that system really is only 15 years old. We may not thank Elon Musk for very much nowadays, but we can thank him for really introducing the Tesla Roadster as the first effective commercialized battery electric vehicle. So our manufacturer partners, Porsche, Jaguar, all of these partners in the championship, they are using our roads, our racetrack, as a laboratory for testing new technology. And I'll give you a real example. So Jaguar, one of our teams, they discovered something in the way that the engine, the battery, the motor was talking to the battery from an efficiency point of view that allowed them to materially improve the efficiency of the race car. It was all in the software and all in the coding. And they were able to roll that code change out over the air to everybody who owned a Jaguar I-Pace, so their road car, their electric road car. And if you had your I-Pace set up to take over-the-air updates, you woke up in the morning and your range had increased by 35 kilometers.
Wow, that's big.
Yeah, so that will give you an example.
For that if I had the money.
Yeah, so that gives you a real example of how these car manufacturers are testing technology on the racetrack, and if it can make their car go faster or drive more efficiently, it's almost entirely going to be relevant to their road cars.
But the example you gave is really amazing. Like 35% increase in range. That's like basically the equivalent.
So it is 35 kilometers more range. So not 35, but even so, 35 kilometers may be the difference between you having to stop for a charge on the road on a long journey or not having to stop for a charge. And I could sit here and talk about the Nissan Leaf, which is now 200% more efficient than when Nissan started in the championship. I can talk about Porsche, who have launched the new Taycan. And in that Taycan, they even have an attack mode button, which is taking a direct part of the sporting format of Formula E and putting it into the car. I can talk about the tyre manufacturer Hankook and how they produce a compound for the racetrack that you can now buy for your road cars. I can go on and on. There is a direct correlation.
But that's really amazing, and I'm sure that sort of makes that the value proposition for the car manufacturers participating in Formula E is sort of like it almost makes its own case just by virtue of how direct applicable these new technologies are that they develop for it. You did mention, and I mentioned Toto Wolff, and of course you kindly reacted to that, and you brought up earlier on sort of the cross relationship between Formula E and Formula One.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because it seems like you sort of are cousins in a certain way, and at the same time, of course, you both have that competitive spirit of wanting to be the number one.
Yeah, look, so I guess I have two boys, by the way, a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. The 16-year-old is very quiet, very calm, very thoughtful, very sporty. The 13-year-old is high energy, very creative, very arty, more mischievous. And I guess that's how I would describe Formula One and Formula E, right? So one of them is much older, 75 years old. We look similar, like we come from the same family because we're single-seater open-wheeled racing cars. And we have some similar crossover. McLaren races in both series. We're both racing on road tracks. We race on some of the same tracks, Mexico City, Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. But what sits beneath is very different. So they're using internal combustion engine. We're using battery electric vehicles. We're very focused on energy transition and sustainability. They're much less focused on, and we can talk about the differences between them if you want to in more detail. The Formula One car has a higher top speed, so it would do about 230 miles an hour. We do about 200 miles an hour because that's what they focus on. We're 30% faster accelerating. Right. So we get to 60 miles an hour in 1.8 seconds. They take about 2.5 seconds because we're focused on the agility and the windier, smaller tracks. So we're owned by businesses with the same start of our names, Liberty Media, Liberty Global, albeit they're run as two completely separate businesses. So look, the CEO of Formula One and I are great friends. We talk regularly, we have dinners regularly, but we're two completely standalone, separate businesses run entirely independently. My honest belief is, over the next 4 to 6 years, the Formula E car will surpass the Formula One car in all elements of performance, and that's not because we're cleverer. It's simply because this is technology which is at the cutting edge.
It's not the sail ship; it's the steamboat.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
And at some point, you're going to notice that. I should ask you, since you mentioned it, that you just launched a documentary on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
So does that mean that that on that front as well, we're going to get some sort of a Formula E, focused on the storytelling, on the is that sort of the idea?
Yeah. So here's the thing for the people listening in. If I was promoting a football business, it's quite easy, right? Because the players have their number on their back, their name on their back, and you see their emotion. You see them cheer when they score a goal. You see them grimace when they pretend to have been fouled. You get that lovely mixed emotion.
You don't get that in a race. No, you don't.
They've got a helmet on.
Yeah.
You can't even see their face. So they're racing with the helmet on, which means trying to create personalities and connect people to the emotion of the driver is very difficult. Formula One did it very well with Drive to Survive, I think. Slightly more soap opera-fied, but I thought did a really good job of unlocking the personalities of the drivers and the team principals. Our series, because we don't want it to be just another version of Drive to Survive, is slightly different. It basically follows 4 drivers through the racing season, and you get to watch the season unfold through their eyes and through their emotional connection. It follows the former world champion, the reigning world champion going in, Jake Dennis, who races for Andretti. It follows the bad boy of motorsport, Dan Ticktum, Formula Red Bull driver who was banned from driving after intentionally crashing out another car on the racetrack. It follows the kind of bridesmaid, Mitch Evans, the Jaguar driver that's finished second more times than anybody else. And it also follows Antonio Felix da Costa, the Portuguese Porsche driver, who basically didn't score a point for the first half of the season and then went on this incredible rampage where he won more races than anybody else in the second half. So we basically give you the insight of what it's like to be a driver in an elite motorsport.
Yeah, it sounds really cool. And I guess it's sort of indeed has a different type of storytelling where you really relate to one character or another, as opposed to sort of going back and forth. I do want to shift gears a little bit and talking about storytelling and talking about
Yeah.
personalities. Talk a little bit more about you, Jeff, not the CEO of Formula E, but you as a person and perhaps as a leader. I often ask guests on this lecture, was it always your dream to become the CEO of the company that they lead? And of course, in your case, I suppose if the visual correction is what I see from you is true, then it would have been absolutely impossible, mechanically impossible for you to have been a little boy and have dreamt of leading Formula E one day, since it didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
So what was it that you wanted to be when you grew up, when you were actually at that age that perhaps your sons are now?
So I don't know how most people answer that question, Pete. Has anybody ever said yes, that it was their dream to run the company they were?
Mostly no, but
Yeah.
it's never been so extremely the case that the business they ran simply did not
Didn't exist. Yeah. Yeah. So look, I can honestly say I'm 51. I'm not even sure I know what I want to do now. Let alone, did I dream of doing this? So I've kind of grown up. I came from very humble beginnings. So my dad was a fireman, my mum was a nurse. We grew up in a council house environment. Um, my older brother, was the first person in our family to go to university. In fact, I think he was probably the first person to ever do A levels, so kind of extended education in any way.
Wow.
Um, so for me to have grown up as a small boy with aspirations to run a massive global business, it just wouldn't have been on my radar. And you're quite right. This business didn't exist. I think I had a framework for what I really wanted from a job and the kind of business that I really wanted to be in. And that's changed as I've got older. I worked for a massive corporation in telecoms and media. I ran that and I loved it. But as I got towards 50, I realized I wanted something different. I wanted to work in a much smaller organization where I could have a much more tangible impact on the business and have a much more direct impact on the people in the business. So I went from having a business where I oversaw 17,000 people to a business where I have 200 people or 250 people. I wanted to work in an area that was much higher energy and much more volatile in terms of the emotional highs and lows of the business. I came from an annuity business that was very predictable, uh, very standardized, very, very easy to understand, very, very easy to predict. And probably for the first time in my life, because my children got a bit older, I was happy to work in a business where I travel a lot. And I now travel. I travel 7 months of the year. I'm away from home 7 months of the year. I could never and would never have done that when my children were 10, 11, 12 years old. The fact that they're now at boarding school and a bit older allows me the freedom to do that. So, and I had to work in a place, and I've always had to work in a place where the people are fascinating, because I love people and I'm fascinated by people and people's stories. And trust me, motorsport has some of the most fascinating people you'll ever meet.
This I absolutely believe that. But it's really, I find that a very, very inspiring answer, because it's not just, as you say, that you might have had certain dreams as you were growing up about the place you wanted to work in or the person you wanted to be, but it's also that that can actually change over time. And as you grow in your career, that basically, your dreams actually change, right?
Oh,
Like you
100%.
you might have had a dream when you were 18. You might have even achieved that dream when you were 30 or 40 years old. But when you then hit 40 or 45, you're like, you know what? Actually, now that I'm in a different phase of life, my dreams evolve also. And then you're able to pursue that. Tell us a little bit more, though, about obviously the people that are listening are mostly in their early 20s.
Yeah.
And they're going to obviously make decisions now about what to do. When you were that age, so a little bit older, and
Yeah.
you were actually at this point of starting your career, how did you actually choose which job you eventually ended up taking, and sort of the first choices that you made in your professional career?
Yeah. So, when I finished my A levels, my brother was still at university. My parents actually couldn't afford for both of us to be at university at the same time. So he was 3 years older than me. So we took
Wow.
we took the decision that I would just get a job for a year. Then when he finished university, I would go to university as he came out.
Wow.
Um, in the year that I worked, a couple of things happened. So I loved working. loved working. I loved earning money. I loved working. I felt completely liberated by that process of being able to do things I wanted to do and for me to be able to fund it and pay to do it. The second thing was the place I was working recognized that and recognized ability in me. So wanted to pay for me to do qualifications and stay working with them. So when the time that year passed, I was deep into kind of accountancy qualifications. I went on and did an MBA with that organization. I then did an MSc, another master's degree with that organization. So I was accumulating kind of the academic qualifications I couldn't have got straight away. And at the same time, I was growing vocationally through work. It just so happened that first half of my life was in automotive. So I worked to start with for a company called Premier Automotive Group, who was Ford Motor Company, Jaguar, Aston Martin, Volvo, Mercury, had a large group of car companies. And I went from there to work for the Japanese company Honda. Got to travel the world with Honda, got to work with Formula One, work with MotoGP, work with powerboat racing. I worked in an enormous amount of motorsport.
Wow.
So I guess you could say from that point, if I'd gone to Formula E then, that would have felt like a really logical career progression.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
but that's not what happened. Well,
I want to ask you, I want to get to that, but before we get to that, I just want to zoom in just one more time on sort of the start of that journey.
Yeah.
Would you then say that there's a certain path dependency that it was sort of by chance or by necessity really that you had to start working before you went to university?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Right. And then it turned out that was actually an opportunity, that company believed in you, that they sort of said, you know what, whatever you need, we will make it work with what we need from you.
Yeah.
And is that sort of an argument in favor of allowing serendipity to decide the initial path that you take, because all paths lead to Rome or something like that eventually?
Well, look, I'm a sample of one. So that's not a great sample size, as I'm sure your students will know. Look, I had very little interest in school, very little interest. I went to school. I loved sport. I played a lot of sport. I loved being sociable. I actually met, I say my wife, she wasn't my wife then, but I met the lady that would become my wife when I was 15 years old.
Wow.
So I was much more interested in spending time with her, spending time with my friends, playing sport. I had zero interest in academia. And so for me, the minute I hit the workplace, it was like an epiphany for me. All of a sudden, I was like a sponge. I was learning everything, trying everything. It unlocked an energy in me that school hadn't done. And interestingly for me, I went on to accumulate an enormous amount of qualifications and letters after my name, all done with great passion, only because I really felt that it would help me to progress through work. Not so it wasn't study work. Mine was work, study work, study work, study work, study work, sit together in harmony. It was kind of a synchronous thing. Now, when you say, is that an argument for allowing a bit of serendipity to happen? Of course, I have two children of my own, and there is no way on God's earth I'm letting
You're not going to let that happen.
No, because as I say to my oldest son, who's doing his GCSEs at the moment, and what I say to him is, his exam results won't define him. So in reality, if he does really badly in his exams, that is no guarantee that he won't be successful in work.
Sure.
And I'm a walking, talking, perfect example of that. On the other hand, if he does amazingly in his exams, that is no guarantee of success in work. Because I went to school with some of the brightest people you'll ever meet who went to Oxbridge that have never really gone on and kicked on and been successful in the workplace.
But you do have probabilities.
Exactly.
Right.
On balance, I'd rather have the qualifications than not have them. That's what I say. That's what I say to him. So I'm not quite so easygoing about letting him follow my path. But I'll also, if that's the way it goes, he'll have my full support, and I'll be there as a constant reminder for him that it doesn't mean it's all over for him.
I mean, I think that's beautiful. You know, and I think at the end of the day, maybe the most important thing is having a sort of a supportive environment. You know, whether it's your parents or other people around you,
Yeah.
that you can gather a village around you.
Yeah. Now, by the way, if my parents were here, love my parents to bits, both still with us. But if my parents were here and they were honest with this group, they would say they worked shift patterns, my parents.
Yeah.
So my dad was a fireman, my mum was a nurse, which basically meant my brother and I never saw them together at the same time.
Right.
They overlapped. And I can promise you, even to the point I finished my levels, I don't think either of my parents ever asked me how I was doing at school.
Wow. Yeah. So in that case, yeah.
Their
I mean,
priorities were different.
Yeah, no, but I guess as a parent, you know, when you then become a parent yourself, you sort of feel like, okay, I want to maximize the chances here and sort of do what I can. And, you know, you've been more privileged than your parents, of course, at least
Much more,
financially.
yeah. Yeah.
And so you were able to do that. Going back to the story you were telling about sort of the logical progress of your career, though, where you would have ended up in Formula One or Formula E or another car racing sport. But that actually is not what happened.
Yeah.
And you made a different choice. Tell us about that, about making twists and turns in your career and sort of the reasons why somebody might decide to do that.
So I was doing an interview when I was at Honda. I did an interview for the press, and they said to me, where'd you go from here? Because you work for this incredible company, growing really quickly. You've got motorsport, you've got all these wonderful things. Where'd you go from here? And I honestly said, there's nowhere I would rather be than here. And I was a huge golf fan. And I said, unless Callaway, the golf company, are looking for a chief marketing officer, I'm not going anywhere. And they published that article. And the following day, I had a call from Callaway, the golf company, to say, we are looking for a chief marketing officer. And I met them a few times. They offered me the role. I took it. I traveled the world, sitting on the board of a golf company. I absolutely loved it. And then my first son was born. And I agree with my wife. I didn't really want to be away from home every other week. I really wanted to be around. So I decided to take a role in the UK and to stay stationed in
Callaway in the US.
That's right, based in California, Carlsbad in California. And the role I took, bizarrely, was with a gentleman who you may have heard of called Richard Branson.
Oh, wow.
And I took the role to help rebrand their television business, Virgin Television. And I pretty much stayed in that company in various different guises for 14 years.
I mean, it's absolutely a fascinating story. You know, how both, I suppose, you know, you do at some points want to follow your passion or your dream, which I suppose at that point in time was to be the chief marketing officer of Callaway. And at other points, you sort of want to put your personal dreams just a little bit on the back burner, and sort of say, hey, there's things that are also important in my life, my wife, my family, my son, my daughter, and on the basis of that, make other choices than you might have done if you were just thinking about yourself.
I think that's completely right. And some people, when you say to people, what's your dream job? I think some people go to category. Oh, my dream job's to work in banking. My dream job's to work in sports. My dream job's to work in the motor industry. They go to category. I've never really been a category guy. My dream job is more psychographical than that. So I'll say, well, my dream job is to work with people who are fascinating to me, to work in organizations where my personal learning and development never stops. So, in a fast-paced, fast-moving environment where I get to experience different cultures and travel the world and understand different cultures better. I've never been limited by category.
I mean, and of course, there's a great example from your career. There's many examples from your career where you can say, maybe working for a telephone company would have otherwise not have been my dream, but when it's for a person like Richard Branson,
Sure.
It changes things. So tell us a little bit about, since you mentioned him, tell us a little bit about how it is to work for a visionary lead, like a truly universally respected, or at least accepted as being a visionary leader as Richard Branson's. What are the benefits you get from that as a person working for a person like that?
And that's one of the common threads, actually. So when I was at Honda, I worked for a chap called, Soshiro Honda was the founder of Honda. When I was at Callaway, Ely Callaway was the founder of Callaway. Richard Branson is founded the Virgin organization. Mike Freeze kind of runs Liberty Global. So I think that is one of the common threads, is that I've always worked for these hugely entrepreneurial characters, whose name are above the door, their names above the company. And they all have very similar traits: incredibly driven. So absolutely incredibly driven, high risk taking, fairly obsessive about what they're doing, but also an enormous amount of fun. So I would say, when I worked for Richard, and I know Richard pretty well, working for Richard was an incredible experience, because when the world was zigging, he was zagging.
Mm.
So he was always swimming against the tide. He was always trying to disrupt in the interest of the customer. And he was an enormous amount of fun. Some of my funniest times in my life have been had with Richard. Some of the greatest stories I tell, and I can't tell you, I'm afraid, because I'd get arrested. But some of the greatest stories I tell are time I spent with Richard. But I learn an enormous amount about kind of non-conformist behavior. When you're working for brilliant entrepreneurs, you learn to see opportunities where other people see challenges.
Yeah, I can totally see that. At least I think we can all imagine how that would be for an entrepreneur like Richard Branson. I suppose also the other examples that you gave. Maybe a final question on that. And since we also talked about family, of course, when you work for founders, when you work for people that are extremely driven, they also tend, in many cases, to be extremely demanding.
Yeah.
And sort of make no distinction between personal life and work life, make no distinctions between night and day, and between weekdays and weekends.
Yeah.
How do you, since you mentioned that sort of being there for your family at key moments was very important to you and your family, how were you able to navigate that challenge, which is a very particular challenge?
Yeah, so look, you'll often hear the word used, kind of work-life balance, and I can't bear that term, if I'm honest with you, because I think the visual imagery I get when people talk about work-life balance is kind of the scales of justice, and on one side of the scales is work, and on the other side is life, and it's almost pitting them against each other in this kind of a battle for supremacy. And for me, that's just not a reasonable reflection of what life is actually like. So I tend to talk about harmony, work-life harmony. And there isn't a day at work I don't deal with life stuff, talk to my wife, talk to my kids, deal with home admin. There also isn't a day when I'm off work on holiday where I'm not dealing with work stuff, phoning my team, checking in, reading my emails, doing stuff like that. So the reality is the two things have to exist in harmony. Now, I'm incredibly driven. So doesn't matter who I've worked for, I've never, ever felt that's a problem for me. On the other hand, I try to be slightly more conscious of it with my own team, which means just because I'm incredibly driven and
Right.
Very happy to answer calls at 2:00 in the morning, it doesn't mean I expect them to do that. They have a different harmony than I have. But I think because I'm very driven, I found it very comfortable working in those types of environments. I've never been a 9 to 5 type of guy. That
Right.
wouldn't work. That wouldn't work for me.
Was that something that you had to agree with your partner, that in order to make it work, that there was going to have to be some trade-offs made on the one side and on the other?
Not really. And well, look, one of the great beauties of being with somebody since you're 15 years old is, yeah, she's a little older than me, but not much older than me. When we got together, I was studying, she was studying. Neither of us worked. We didn't understand what work was. We didn't have children. We've done all of this together. My wife worked until we had our first son. And I say this, and I don't say this to come across as a lovely guy. I say this because it's absolutely true, which is my wife and I are two halves of the same job. There is no way I could do my job. I couldn't travel the world for 7 months. I couldn't work 50, 60 hours a week.
Right.
With children and a house to look after and home admin to do, unless she's able to do all of the other parts of the role. So we're two halves of a whole. We do this job together. So if people say to me, "That's an amazing career," you must be very proud. That's for me and my wife. It's not one of us doing the career and one of us doing the other stuff. It's both of us in this career together. And I think the beauty of being together for so long is neither of us knew any different. She's known me for as long as anybody on the planet other than my brother and my parents. And therefore everything we have it together. Everything we've done it together. Every work job, every issue at work I've ever had, I've discussed with her. Every promotion I've had, I've celebrated with her. So that makes life a lot easier, I think.
I mean, I see a lot of people sort of nodding and applauding for that comment. It is, of course, something that it's a good reminder, I think, because we don't often talk about that when we're talking about our careers, about business, about companies, and so on. And it's actually not even the most common template anymore that we hear about. We often celebrate individuals, and sometimes individuals actually celebrate themselves over their family and make those choices. So
I'll tell, as you asked, Sylvester, so one thing I will share, because this has come to me later in life, right? So I think if there's any way if I could give one piece of advice around that topic, it would be this. I'm a huge fan of sport. I was a competitive sports person, and I observe a lot of elite sports people. And there is one common trait they all have. And the trait they have is they train hard, they compete hard, and they recover hard. And they know those three things have to work in perfect symmetry. So the training for them might be in the gym, putting a shift in the bike, learning tactics, whatever it is, learning new skills. Competing is the moment it all comes together, a World Cup final, a Premier League game, an Ashes test, whatever your sport is. And they know that in order to be at their best for competition, recovery is a key component of that. And that could be a day off. If we were talking to boxers, they will talk about a month off or 6 weeks off. But those three things happen together in harmony. I've spent my entire career training hard, learning new stuff, talking to people, reading about things, analyzing, looking at data. I love competition. I love the moments of competition. For me now, that's an event, a race weekend in Monaco, for example, or a big negotiation, whatever. I love that moment. And I've always sacrificed recovery. If I'd go further than that, I've felt guilty to recover, thinking I should be back in the office, or I should be first person in the office. I need to show up. I need to be here physically. I need to be doing it. I think some of my effectiveness over the years has been compromised by my inability to recover and see that as equally important as the other things, the training and the competing. And I would advise everybody coming into the workforce to remember to be at your absolute best, to deliver your full return on investment to your employer and to yourself. Those three things have to be taken in equal measure.
yeah, that's very profound, and I'm trying not to look at myself when you give that advice, because I realize I should follow that advice probably a little bit more. And as you said, it's an advice you give to the students. It's an advice probably you also give to yourself, and obviously you're not done yet. So I suppose that everyone in this call can follow that.
We can all learn.
This has been great, Jeff. I do want to make sure we leave some space to get some students' questions.
Sure.
But I have to say, I mean, like, these last couple of minutes have been, incredibly inspiring. And I really thank you for sharing those
my pleasure.
personal lessons. I do think, though, that since you are leading such an exciting company in an exciting race car competition, that some of the question, my guess is, will be about that. So let's have a look.
Bring it on.
I want to maybe start with Mehdi. Mehdi, who's from Tunisia, but actually lives and studies in Barcelona, and is doing a master in digital marketing. Mehdi, I'm going to take a wild guess that your question is going to involve marketing.
It wouldn't take a lot of while. It was obvious, huh? Well, it has marketing and motorsport, both of my worlds colliding, and I have Mr. Dodds with me, so I'm happy today.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Dodds. It's a huge pleasure to talk to you, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity to ask you a question. You introduced the Evo sessions, where you bring out 11 to 12, like one of the most renowned actors and sports players. And also, you mentioned earlier the Amazon Prime series that follows also the drivers of the Formula E, and I think that both of these are amazing marketing and brand strategies. And you also mentioned how is your plan to even like get even more and more people to follow Formula E. What do you think would be like after these two, especially the Evo sessions and the Amazon Prime series? What do you think would be the next steps for Formula E to broaden the audience and image, and also to increase the engagement with the whole racing idea?
So, Mehdi, thank you for the question. Look, I think there's some very, very obvious things. So we need to have more races in more countries, in more cities in the world to broaden our appeal to different communities that don't get to see the race up close and personal. We can add media partners around the world. So that means, people like ITV in the UK or CBS in the US or ProSieben in Germany. So we add big media partners. The Evo sessions is not one and done though. So we did one. My view is that is something that could become an annual fixture for us. And for those of your colleagues who aren't so familiar with it as you, the Evo sessions basically put 11 massive content creators into the teams and into our cars. And we allowed them to tell their story through their channels, through their followership. So their collective followership was 300 million followers.
Wow.
But we also had a guest appearance in the Evo sessions from a gentleman called Mr. Beast, Jimmy Donaldson, most followed person on the planet with about 600 to 700 million followers of his own. So that was really trying to take motorsport to an audience, a new audience that weren't familiar with motorsport. And we were leveraging the brands of those 11 creators, their own brands, to talk to their followership. That has been incredibly successful for us. 90% of the people that watched it had never watched a Formula E race. So it can't be one and done. That's something we'll look to repeat the format on.
That's amazing. Thank you, Mehdi, for that question.
Thanks, Mehdi.
That was really great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And then perhaps as a follow-up, we can go to Marta. Marta, who's also studying in Barcelona. And actually, I understand is doing a bachelor in sports management. That's really cool. So Marta, we're very curious about your question. And I know that you had also a second question about the Girls on Track initiative. So why don't we hear both of those questions from you?
Yes, I was gonna go for the second one because kind of already answered the
That was
first.
great. Yeah, sure.
So lovely to meet you also.
And you too, Marta.
I love your work and everything. I've heard a lot of good things about you from my friends, so
Thank you.
it's nice. So yeah, as you mentioned, I kind of wanted to know like one of my favorite things and kind of what kind of got me into Formula One is the great initiatives that kind of back the whole racing aspect of it. And one of them is the Girls on Track and all of that. So like, how do you see this evolving like into even deeper impact? Because I know every year it's getting larger, and kind of how to like grow participation for women in motorsport, and then also how will you ensure that these initiatives like not just a women's on track, but also like obviously the whole mission on sustainability and all of that. How will you ensure that stays on track while the sport is growing at such like great momentum and like all these new people are coming in that maybe are just like fans of Formula One and don't really know the whole technical sustainability aspect of it?
So lots of people, Marta, ask me, can men and women compete equally in Formula E in the car? So can they race equally? And the honest answer to that question is, I don't know. And I don't know because here's the maths. 97% of the people that hold a license to race a car in the world are men.
Right.
3% of them are female. And simply working through the funnel to get into, there are only, if you count Formula One and Formula E, there are 42 World Championship single-seater racing cars in the world. You can get a seat in. Almost none. So if 97% of the people at the top of the funnel are men, it's almost 100% likely by the time you get to the funnel, it's going to be a man driving that car. So there are two things I think we have to do to test the hypothesis. Can men and women compete equally? We have to see more women in the cars driving the same car against the same men. But if we do that today, the likelihood is that will be a quick conversation, because the challenge is a lot of those men have grown up karting, F4, F3, F2, F1, or Formula E. So the miles under their belt are so significantly higher that it's not a fair comparison. So we're trying to approach it from both ends of the funnel. So at the top of the funnel, we have girls on track. Thousands and thousands and thousands of young women we're encouraging to look at STEM subjects and the motorsports industry, because I hope that 97% becomes 95, 92, 88, 85, 80% over time. And we're pushing more women into the top of the funnel, young women. At the bottom of the funnel, you may have seen in Madrid last year, in Jarama, we had the world's first only women's test, which was the 20 best women drivers in the world in one place, in the same car as our male drivers, with the same team and the same support for hours and hours of time to get used to driving the car. Now, my hope is we'll be filling up the top of the funnel, and we will find a gem at the bottom of the funnel in a woman driver that is so competitive that a team picks her up, and that woman driver can change perceptions amongst young women to encourage more women to want to get into the top of the funnel. Now, that doesn't happen in a season. It happens over 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. What my commitment is to my organization is we've started the process of testing the hypothesis. We will not finish until that has been properly tested and we know the answer. Every bone in my body tells me the answer is men and women can compete equally in motorsport, but the playing conditions are completely different today.
Right. That's fascinating. Would you say that so right now there's no rules, of course, about the gender of a driver, right? There's nothing.
Fastest driver.
Yeah.
As long as it's a human, human being, it can drive and that can drive that car. There are no rules.
And is there a reason why your organization or any other in the racing sports industry, why they wouldn't have followed the tennis model, for example, which obviously been rather successful in creating competitions that are popular both for men and women?
That's Marta's agent phoning her to try and get her into a car.
Oh, it's my mother, but I don't know.
Say hello to your mother.
Downstairs, I don't know what she's calling, but
Well,
let me just mute while you answer.
thank you.
That's okay. So the reason tennis do that, and the reason soccer does that, and the reason golf does that, and the reason boxing does that is quite simple. Men and women cannot compete equally in those sports. If you put the best, and it's been proven out, if you wouldn't put the women's heavyweight boxing champion in the ring with the men's heavyweight boxing champion and expect that to be a fair fight. You wouldn't put Rory McIlroy in with Nelly Korda over 72 holes of golf and expect that to be a fair competition. Sure. You know, there are so many differences. In the same, we've seen it play out in tennis, and that's been tested in tennis. We're not sure that's the case in motorsport.
Yeah.
Maybe horse racing and motorsport are two of those sports where men and women can compete equally. And my view, Peter, is if your opening position is let's give women their own series. There's enough of those, by the way, in motorsport. There's the F1 Academy, for example. But if you say let's give them their own series, I promise you, we'll never know whether they compete equally.
Right.
We'll never know because there's no incentive to try that and to test that. I would argue if we want to attract more young women into motorsport, as much as I love it and I love what Susie's doing, F1 Academy is very different to them racing in F1. Right. If you had a young woman breakthrough into Formula One, you would attract millions and millions and millions of more young women into motorsport. Watching F1 Academy is not the same. It doesn't have the same level of inspiration. And I'm not prepared to give up on the big prize yet.
Right. I think that makes sense. I feel like it's a topic where we could continue to go on and on about, but we do have two final questions, final student questions, and only 5 minutes left in our Racing Hour interview. So let's see if we can hear from Alex. Alex, who is, I believe, from Russia, but also studies in Barcelona. Alex, go ahead.
Hi, Alex.
Yes, Mr. Dodds, thank you for giving us a wonderful presentation. When I was preparing my questions, I first looked at your amazing career, and you've gone into incredible depth of how actually different it was from time to time. now from sales to a CMO at Virgin Media. Now, what interested me in particular, that once you got to the CMO position, you had 13 months of growth. You turned a loss corporation into a profitable, actually. And so obviously you had unique skills that those big guys valued and cherished. Now, my question is, what specific growth levers or like what specific skill applications have you adapted in Formula E? Granted that when it was coming out, it was actually, you were competing against like the giants of the whole entire motorsport industry.
First of all, Alex, you could be my agent. I might take you on the road with me. So look, I think look, my super skill, if I've got one, my super skill through my career has been, I've got a pretty good feeling and sense for what's happening in culture.
Mhm.
So when I was in Virgin Media, for example, you know, I signed up Usain Bolt to come and be our ambassador before the 2012 Olympics. When the Olympics were in the UK, all of the big people sponsoring the Olympics were paying hundreds of millions to do that. I was paying almost nothing, yet we got more exposure than any of them because Usain Bolt was the face of the Olympics. So I think I've always been pretty good at being quite disruptive and quite creative. When I came to Formula E, I think there's a combination here. First of all, we have a tailwind. The tailwind is the electrification of cars. So people moving from petrol and diesel cars to electric cars. So I've been able to benefit from that tailwind, at the same time trying to tap into the culture of new fans, which is why we do things like the Evo sessions. It's why we do things with Mr. Beast. So I think for me, if there's one common thread in my career, it's always been trying to be very disruptive, creatively disruptive, to try and capture the sense of the moment, the culture of the moment, the zeitgeist. And that's always stood me in pretty good stead.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate that we will have time for a final question from Alimkan. Alimkan, who's, I believe, from Azerbaijan and also studies in Barcelona. Alimkan, do you study perhaps something in the area of digital, or is that just an interest of yours? Go ahead with your question.
Hello. First, I want to say that it's not Azerbaijan, it's Kazakhstan.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I feel it's just like saying to me that I'm from the Netherlands.
So I'm just doing my Bachelor of Business Administration. And my question is, your career has spanned from telecoms to motorsports, both undergoing digital revolutions. At Formula E, how do you envision using data, not just for racing performance, but to shape culture, fan behavior, and the future of electric mobility in cities?
Thanks, Alimkan. First of all, Kazakhstan, I love Kazakhstan. I spent a lot of time in Astana in a previous role, in a previous life. So I love it there. I've got many funny stories about my time in Kazakhstan as well. Yeah, you're right. So look, first of all, we're a software-led business. So if a Formula One car pulls into the pit, what you'll normally see is if they've got to make an adjustment, you see the fiberglass comes off or the carbon, someone gets a spanner and they start changing something, same as IndyCar, same as NASCAR. When our cars come in, someone plugs something in and starts to run diagnostics on the car and they start to code. So we're already using digital tools and coding and data right within the core of our motor series. Two of our biggest partners are Infosys and Google Cloud. And they are revolutionizing the way we interact with our fan base, but also the way we run our business through data and through AI. So things like, I'll give an example. We use an AI data agent when we talked about women in motorsport. To accelerate the learning of women coming into motorsport, we have an AI driver coach that effectively can accelerate their learning from being racing cars for 5 years to sitting in a simulator over a period of 6 to 12 months and assimilating every piece of learning that AI driver agent has picked up from observing and taking on the data from other drivers. So AI, data, digital is right at the heart of our business model, whether it's making the cars go faster, introducing new fans to the sport, like using digital channels like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, or whether it's actually using the technology to coach and develop our drivers or emerging drivers to be better. So there isn't a part of our business that isn't underpinned by digital tech.
Excellent. And I by the way, that example of your pit stops being used to read code, I mean, that's just mind blowing, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool. Well, listen, Jeff, I'm afraid that's all the time that we have. Our interview, which was so wide ranging, so interesting, is over. I want to thank you, of course, for sharing with us all your knowledge. I think what we learned about Formula E made us all fans, if we weren't already.
I hope so.
But honestly, I think it all made us fans of you as well, and your sort of attitude towards life and career. And so we really appreciate you taking the time. You've
My pleasure.
very busy life. Good luck with the next races, and we hope to see you again sometime.
Thank you, Peter.
Cool.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye bye now. Bye bye.